The courtroom was a hushed sea of faces, each one focused intently on the proceedings. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if the very walls of the room held their breath. The sharp clink of the judge's gavel echoed through the silence, signaling the start of yet another tense moment in the ongoing divorce trial. Then, the door swung open, and all eyes turned in unison. Carolyn Turner stepped into the courtroom, her presence immediately drawing the gaze of every person in the room. A flicker of surprise rippled through the crowd, followed by a tense stillness that seemed to suspend time. The weight of the moment was palpable. Carolyn, dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, walked with a quiet confidence. But underneath that exterior, the years of struggle and sacrifice weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had once been a force in this very room, a lawyer who commanded respect. Yet now, her return was shrouded in mystery. As Carolyn took her place beside her son, Ethan Turner, the tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. Ethan, a man now caught in the crossfire of a broken marriage, glanced at his mother with a mix of emotions. There was confusion in his eyes, a trace of hope, and a subtle sadness. Was this truly the way things had turned out? Was this the moment that would define his future? Across the room, Sophia Harris, Ethan's estranged wife, sat with her arms crossed, a cold sneer playing at the corners of her mouth. Her gaze met Carolyn's with the sharpness of a blade, but it wasn't just contempt that flashed in her eyes. It was something deeper, a silent fury that Carolyn could feel in her bones. Behind Sophia, her family shifted uncomfortably, sensing the unease in the air but unsure of how to respond. They, too, knew that this trial was about more than just the property or custody of Sarah. It was about something far more personal, something Carolyn was now a part of. Carolyn could feel the room's energy shift as she locked eyes with Sophia for a brief moment. The history between them was more than just a few years of marriage gone wrong. It was the culmination of years of tension, betrayal, and the unraveling of everything Ethan had once believed in. Carolyn had been through it all with her son, and yet there was something different about this moment. The stakes had never been higher. The judge, an older man with a weathered face, peered over his glasses, momentarily pausing his question to Ethan as he took in Carolyn's presence. "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice laced with curiosity, "what brings you back into this courtroom today?" The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. Carolyn had left this life behind years ago, choosing a quieter existence away from the law. Why was she here now, at this moment, when everything seemed to be falling apart? In that brief silence, Carolyn's past as a sharp, successful lawyer flashed through her mind, a past that no one in this room knew fully. Her decision to step away from the courtroom, to abandon her career for her family, was a mystery she had never fully explained. But today, as the weight of the trial pressed down on her, she knew it was time to step back into the ring, not just as a mother, but as someone with the skills to fight back. As the judge waited for her answer, Carolyn took a deep breath. She could feel Ethan's eyes on her, searching for reassurance, even as his own heart was torn in two. The emotional weight of this trial, of everything that had brought them here, was enough to crush anyone. But Carolyn wasn't about to back down. Not today. The battle lines had been drawn. The courtroom was now a battleground, not just for Ethan's future, but for the truth that had been buried beneath years of lies, betrayal, and a marriage gone wrong. And Carolyn Turner wasn't going to let her son lose without a fight. The cold night air nipped at Carolyn's face as she sat on the worn-out couch in the small apartment she had come to call home. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of Ethan's soft breathing as he slept, his face peaceful and unaware of the turmoil that had recently upended their lives. Carolyn, however, could not find peace. James Harrison, her husband of over a decade, had walked out on her and their son, leaving them with nothing but memories of a life she had worked so hard to build. He left her for another woman, someone younger, someone who promised the world he had never given Carolyn. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound she had ever known. Yet there was no time to wallow in the pain. Ethan needed her. She remembered the day he left, the sharp words, the slammed door, and the hollow silence that followed. James had always promised that he would never leave her. But promises, like his love, had proven to be empty. Still, Carolyn wouldn't let herself break. She couldn't afford to. Ethan needed her more than ever. The struggle was real. Carolyn worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep food on the table. She gave up anything that wasn't necessary. A new coat, a night out, the little luxuries she used to take for granted. But when it came time to send Ethan to college, it became clear that sacrifices had to be made. One rainy afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table, Carolyn stared at her wedding ring. The diamond, once a symbol of a future together, now felt like an anchor around her neck. The money she had spent on it, on their life together, seemed meaningless now. With a deep breath, she made a decision. She sold the ring, the last piece of their past that she could still hold on to. The sale of the ring covered a semester of Ethan's tuition, but it cost her a part of her soul. The ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a memory of happier times, of love that once seemed unbreakable. But it was a price she had to pay to give her son the future he deserved. Through it all, Carolyn's love for Ethan never wavered. Every long night spent working, every moment of exhaustion, was worth it because she knew Ethan's dreams were still within reach. There were days when she felt like she was running on empty, but her son's smile, the sound of his laughter, kept her going. Even in the darkest moments, they found small joys. On weekends, they'd walk to the park and play catch, just the 2 of them. Ethan's bright, innocent eyes would sparkle as he ran toward her, and for those fleeting moments, the world seemed to make sense again. But the pain was always lurking beneath the surface. James had left, but his absence didn't just affect Carolyn. It affected Ethan too. She saw it in the way he flinched whenever someone mentioned his father, the quiet moments when he sat by the window, staring out as if waiting for something. Carolyn knew her son was hurting, and there was nothing she could do to heal the wound that his father had caused. Despite the hardship, Carolyn promised herself one thing: she would protect Ethan at all costs. No matter how hard things got, she would be the one constant in his life. She would never abandon him, no matter how much the world tried to knock them down. As the years went by, Ethan grew stronger. He became a young man, determined to rise above the pain, determined to make something of himself, just as Carolyn had always hoped. But she could see the weight of his father's abandonment in his eyes, in the way he sometimes shut himself off, afraid to get too close to anyone. It hurt her deeply, but she understood. She had sacrificed so much to give him a chance at a better life. But there was a price to be paid for those sacrifices. Now, as the courtroom drama unfolded, Carolyn couldn't help but think of how far they had come. Ethan had grown into a man of resilience, someone who had learned to survive despite the odds. But the toll of the past still lingered in him. And now, with Sophia's neglect pulling him deeper into despair, Carolyn was faced with a new battle, one that would test everything she had fought for. Ethan's struggles were no longer just about financial hardship or growing pains. They were about love, trust, and healing, a healing Carolyn had fought so hard to protect. As she watched him in the courtroom, she realized that the fight she had been preparing for wasn't just for property or custody. It was for her son's heart, for his future, and she would never let go. Ethan's accident came without warning, like a storm on the horizon that no one saw coming. One moment, he was working, doing what he loved, providing for his family, and the next, everything was different. The industrial accident was brutal. The machinery that had once seemed like a harmless tool became an unforgiving beast, leaving Ethan with broken bones, deep cuts, and a pain that stretched beyond what words could describe. Carolyn arrived at the hospital, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't been prepared for the sight that awaited her. Ethan lay unconscious, his face bruised and swollen, a tangled mess of tubes and wires keeping him tethered to the world. The sterile smell of the hospital hit her with the force of a blow. She rushed to his side, holding his hand with a tenderness that only a mother could muster. She whispered his name over and over again, but he didn't respond. Her mind was a whirlwind, but her heart was in free fall. Every moment felt like a blur, as if she were floating just above the ground, unable to touch reality. Her strong, independent son, so full of life and promise, was now lying in a hospital bed, and she couldn't undo the damage. The accident had stolen his strength, leaving him vulnerable and helpless. And Carolyn, despite all her resilience, felt powerless. She stayed by his side for hours, refusing to leave even when the doctors advised rest. Ethan needed her now more than ever. His body was broken, but what hurt her more was the fear she saw in his eyes when he finally woke up. The fear of the unknown, the fear of what life would be like now, with a future that had suddenly been taken from him. But even more difficult than watching Ethan suffer was the growing distance she felt from Sophia. In the beginning, when they first found out about the accident, Sophia had been worried. She had rushed to the hospital, her face pale with concern, her words filled with sympathy. "How bad is it? How bad is he hurt?" she had asked, her voice trembling with genuine fear. Carolyn, too numb to respond, simply nodded, unable to find the words. But that was before. As the days passed, Sophia's concern began to fade, replaced by a cold indifference that shocked Carolyn to her core. She watched as Sophia, once so warm and compassionate, withdrew emotionally. Where once she would have stayed by Ethan's side, now she stayed in the background, barely speaking to him. Her conversations with him became perfunctory, nothing more than shallow exchanges of pleasantries. Sophia seemed to be more concerned with her own discomfort, her own problems, than with Ethan's well-being. She avoided the hospital visits, offering excuses that felt hollow. "I'm just too busy," she'd say. "I have a lot going on right now." Carolyn could see right through the facade. It was clear. Sophia no longer cared the way she once had. The once bonded couple was now drifting apart, their relationship strained beyond repair. Carolyn, watching this unravel, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. She had hoped that Sophia would be the supportive partner Ethan needed during this difficult time. But instead, she was retreating further into herself, distancing herself from the very person she had sworn to love and support. Ethan noticed it too. It was written all over his face, the disappointment, the hurt. He had always believed in the strength of their marriage, had always thought that Sophia would be there for him when he needed her the most. But as the days dragged on and his injuries began to heal, he realized that he had been wrong. Sophia wasn't there for him, not in the way he needed. Carolyn, too, was noticing the shift in their household. The tension between her and Sophia grew with each passing day. What had once been a home full of warmth and love now felt cold, fractured by the unspoken words that hung heavy in the air. Carolyn found herself becoming more isolated, unsure of where she stood. She had always believed that family meant unconditional support, especially in times of crisis. But now, that support was slipping away, and Carolyn was left questioning everything she had once known about Sophia. The internal conflict within Carolyn was consuming her. She had always been the protector, the one who fought for Ethan, who made sacrifices without hesitation. But now she was torn between defending her son and protecting him from the growing rift between him and Sophia. Torn between her loyalty to Ethan and the quiet whispers of doubt that echoed in her mind. Could she stand by and watch as Sophia's indifference tore apart the family they had once been? As Ethan's recovery continued, so did the unraveling of everything Carolyn had hoped for. She wanted to believe in the love and commitment Sophia had once shown her son. She wanted to believe that deep down, Sophia would come back to him, would find the strength to be the woman she had once promised to be. But as the days passed, Carolyn's doubts grew stronger, and the reality of the situation became clearer. The fracture was too deep to mend. The days had blurred together, but one thing had become painfully clear to Carolyn. Something wasn't right. She had always been able to read people, to sense when things were off, and right now, everything felt off. Sophia's behavior, once warm and affectionate, had transformed into something distant and cold, as if a wall had been slowly but steadily built between them. At first, Carolyn told herself she was imagining things. Maybe it was just the stress of the accident, the pressure of everything weighing on them. But with each passing day, her suspicions grew stronger. She watched as Sophia became more withdrawn, more preoccupied with herself. She barely spoke to Ethan anymore. Where once their conversations were filled with care, now they were curt, lacking the tenderness that had once defined their relationship. Sophia would come home late, often with excuses that never quite made sense. Work, running errands, meeting friends. The more Carolyn observed, the more it felt like Sophia was hiding something. There were subtle shifts in the way she carried herself. Her once warm smile had been replaced by a tight, controlled expression, and the moments of vulnerability that Carolyn had once seen in her were now gone. It wasn't just that Sophia was busy. It was that she was shutting everyone out, particularly Ethan. Carolyn felt a pang of worry, a growing sense of dread. Could she be betraying her son? One afternoon, as Carolyn went about her usual errands, she found herself walking through the market, a place she often visited to pick up fresh produce and other essentials. She was halfway through picking out tomatoes when a familiar voice caught her attention. It was Marcia, an older woman who ran the flower shop down the street. Marcia had always been friendly with Carolyn, always willing to chat about the weather or the latest neighborhood gossip. But today her tone was different. "Did you hear about Sophia?" Marcia asked, her voice low, as though she didn't want to be overheard. "She's been spending a lot of time with that William Harris from the real estate office. I've seen them together more than once, and let me tell you, it doesn't look like just business. She's been going out with him late, real late." Carolyn's heart dropped. She forced a smile, trying to keep her voice steady. "What are you talking about, Marcia?" "You didn't hear it from me," Marcia whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But there's been talk. She's seen him all over town. People are starting to put two and two together." The world around Carolyn seemed to slow. She had heard the rumors before, of course. The whispers that followed Sophia wherever she went. The hushed conversations in the corners of the room when Carolyn wasn't looking. But hearing it directly from someone she trusted made it feel all too real. Carolyn's stomach twisted in knots. "Thanks for letting me know," Carolyn managed to say, but the words tasted bitter in her mouth. As she walked away, her mind raced. What was she supposed to do with this information? Confront Sophia? Was it even possible to confront her without causing irreparable damage? Carolyn wasn't sure, but what she did know was that something wasn't right, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. As the days dragged on, Carolyn's suspicions grew stronger. Sophia's late nights continued, and the coldness in her interactions with Ethan deepened. Carolyn would lie awake at night, wrestling with her thoughts. She had always been fiercely protective of her son, but now she didn't know what to do. She couldn't shake the image of Sophia with William Harris, couldn't unhear the rumors. What if Sophia really was betraying Ethan? What if everything Carolyn had believed about her son's marriage was a lie? The tension in the household became unbearable. Ethan, still recovering from his injuries, seemed oblivious to the growing distance between his wife and his mother. But Carolyn knew. She could see the way he looked at Sophia, hoping for the same warmth, the same love he had once known. And she could see the way Sophia barely responded, her indifference slicing through the air like a knife. Carolyn's love for her son was the only thing that kept her grounded. She had promised to protect him no matter what, but she found herself torn. She wanted to believe the best in Sophia, wanted to believe that this was just a rough patch, that the woman who had once stood beside Ethan in good times and bad would return. But with every passing day, the cracks in Sophia's facade grew wider. Carolyn couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep the truth from Ethan. The looming divorce was no longer just a distant possibility. Carolyn could feel it coming, like the calm before a storm. Every argument, every cold glance from Sophia only pushed them closer to the inevitable. Carolyn knew that the moment of reckoning was approaching. She could only hope that when it came, she would be strong enough to protect Ethan from the fallout. The meeting with James Foster, the private investigator, took place in a small, dimly lit office tucked away in the heart of the city. Carolyn had known the moment she hired him that she was walking a fine line between seeking the truth and stepping into a world of hurt. But now, as she sat across from James, the gravity of what she was about to hear settled heavily in her chest. Her hands, tightly clasped in her lap, trembled ever so slightly, betraying her calm facade. James wasn't a man given to unnecessary pleasantries. He was all business, his face stoic as he slid a thick manila envelope across the table to Carolyn. She stared at it for a moment, the paper seeming to burn through her, her heart racing. This was it. The proof she had dreaded would come, the moment that would tear apart everything she had hoped for. She had expected to find the evidence, but now that it was right there in front of her, she wasn't sure if she was ready. "Everything's in there," James said, his voice low and controlled. "Photos, recordings, everything." Carolyn nodded but didn't speak. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, reached for the envelope, and slowly opened it. The first photo she saw nearly knocked the air out of her. There was Sophia, smiling up at William Jackson, her hand resting casually on his arm as they stood in front of a restaurant. In the background, a private car idled. Sophia and William had clearly been out together, just the two of them. The second photo was even more damning. Sophia and William in a hotel lobby, sharing a kiss that was far too intimate for someone who was supposedly married to Ethan. Carolyn's chest tightened as she absorbed the evidence. It was all there, irrefutable proof of the affair. Her throat constricted, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her mind raced, but her body was frozen in place. How long had this been going on? How could Sophia, someone Carolyn had once trusted, betray her son like this? Carolyn's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Now wasn't the time for tears. There would be time for that later, she thought, if there was any time left. James cleared his throat. "I've also included the audio recordings, confirming their conversations. They're in the hotel room on the night of the photos." "It's all there, Carolyn. They've been having an affair for months." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. The woman who had once been so kind, so loving, had become a stranger, a woman capable of such deceit. The betrayal wasn't just against Ethan. It was a betrayal of Carolyn herself, a betrayal of everything she had believed in. But even as the pain of the discovery washed over her, a deeper emotion began to rise. Determination. This wasn't just about the heartbreak anymore. This was about protecting Ethan. She couldn't let this go. She couldn't allow Sophia's actions to destroy her son any further. She looked up at James, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "How do I use this?" she asked. "How do I make sure Ethan gets the justice he deserves?" James regarded her for a long moment before answering. "You have the evidence now. It's up to you how you want to proceed. You can confront Sophia, or you can go straight to the lawyer with everything." Carolyn nodded slowly, her mind already made up. The truth, no matter how much it hurt, was now a weapon. And she wasn't going to let Sophia use her lies to continue destroying Ethan's life. Driving back home, Carolyn's mind was a tangled mess of emotions. She had wanted to be wrong. She had wanted to believe that Sophia wasn't capable of this kind of betrayal. But now, the truth was clear, and it was devastating. Her heart ached. For Ethan, for the pain he would feel once he learned the truth. How could she break it to him? How could she tell him that the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted, was not who he thought she was? Every moment of the past few months, the coldness, the late nights, the distance, suddenly made sense. Carolyn had suspected something was wrong, but she had never imagined it would go this far. The betrayal stung, but it was Ethan she worried about most. How would he react when he knew the truth? Could he ever forgive Sophia? Could he even forgive her for not protecting him sooner? But she knew there was no choice. She couldn't protect Ethan from the pain forever. The only way forward was to confront the truth head-on. It was time to fight for him, to shield him from the devastation that had been slowly creeping into his life. He deserved to know, no matter how hard it would be. Carolyn's resolve hardened as she parked the car in front of her house. She had the evidence. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't about sparing anyone's feelings anymore. It wasn't about preserving the facade of a perfect marriage. It was about protecting Ethan, giving him the strength to move forward, and ensuring that Sophia's betrayal didn't define his future. She opened the front door, her mind already racing ahead to what was coming. Ethan was in the living room, reading a book on the couch. He looked up when she entered, his tired eyes softening as he saw her face. Carolyn could see the worry in his eyes, could feel his pain radiating toward her even from across the room. "Mom?" Ethan asked gently, his voice filled with concern. "Is everything okay?" Carolyn took a deep breath, steeling herself for the words that would shatter his world. She could feel her heart breaking all over again, but she knew that this was what she had to do. She would fight for him. She would protect him. "No matter what. I need to talk to you, Ethan," she said, her voice firm but filled with a mother's love. "There's something you need to know." The day Sophia chose to serve Ethan with the divorce papers was a clear one, the kind of morning that should have been filled with peace. But in the Turner household, it was anything but. Carolyn could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the entire world was holding its breath. She had been expecting something. Maybe not this, but something, and now that it was here, she could barely contain the wave of anger that swept over her. Sophia walked in, her steps as deliberate as her actions. She was dressed in business attire, her expression icy and composed, the kind of woman who had everything under control. She didn't seem like someone walking into a moment of personal devastation. She seemed like someone who was making a calculated move, someone who had planned every word she was about to say. Without saying a word, she placed the envelope on the coffee table, her fingers pressing it down firmly as though it were a declaration of war. She didn't even look at Ethan, her eyes coldly focused on Carolyn instead, as if daring her to say something. Ethan looked up at the papers, his face going pale. He had been expecting a confrontation, but not this, not now. The man who had once been so confident, so full of life and ambition, seemed smaller in that moment, vulnerable, unsure, completely exposed. He reached out to pick up the papers, but his hand shook as it hovered over the envelope. Sophia watched him with an expression that could have been carved from stone. "Ethan," she said, her voice cool and detached. "This is it. We're done. I'm taking half of everything, including the house." The words struck like a physical blow. Ethan looked up, his confusion and pain written all over his face. "What?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you talking about?" Sophia didn't respond to his pain. Instead, she opened the envelope slowly, deliberately. She handed him the papers like a business transaction, as if this was all some kind of deal she was closing. The words on the page didn't seem to affect her, and Carolyn could see it clearly now, the malicious calculation in Sophia's every move. "This house," Sophia continued, her voice now full of icy determination, "is half mine. You think I'm going to walk away with nothing after everything I've sacrificed? No, Ethan, you'll give me my share. It's what I deserve." Carolyn's breath caught in her throat, a fire of rage burning deep within her. She had watched Ethan pour his heart and soul into that house, watched him fight for every inch of what they had built together. He had given up so much for it, his time, his energy, and his love. And now this? Now, after everything, Sophia had the audacity to demand half of it? Carolyn stood, her fists clenched at her sides. The urge to scream, to lash out, was almost overwhelming. She took a step forward, but Ethan stopped her with a quiet hand on her arm, his eyes wide, his face pale. "Mom, please," he whispered, a tremor in his voice. Carolyn's heart broke at the sight of her son, her strong, resilient son, brought to his knees by the very person he had trusted. But her resolve was hardening by the second. She wouldn't let this happen. Not on her watch. "You're wrong, Sophia," Carolyn said, her voice low but firm. She looked straight at her, refusing to let her anger control her. "You've already taken so much from Ethan. But this house? This is his. He worked for it. He sacrificed for it. And I won't let you destroy that." Sophia's gaze faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "You can't stop this." Ethan signed the papers. "This is happening whether you like it or not." The words stung, but Carolyn didn't flinch. She knew now, beyond any doubt, that this wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about the house. Sophia was trying to tear apart the last shred of Ethan's dignity, to break him down completely. And Carolyn would not allow it. The tension in the room was unbearable, the weight of the moment settling in like a heavy fog. Carolyn could feel it deep in her bones now. Sophia wasn't just angry, she wasn't just hurt. She was vengeful. And what was worse, she was cold enough to manipulate Ethan's vulnerabilities for her own gain. Carolyn's heart clenched as she watched Sophia stand there, still so poised, so calm. It was as if she wasn't looking at her husband anymore, but rather at a commodity, something she could possess, something she could use to further her own plans. She realized now that this was never about love. This was about control, about stripping away the last bit of power Ethan had. The house was just a symbol, but it represented everything Ethan had worked for: his struggle, his sacrifice, his pride. Sophia had set her sights on it, and now it was clear. She intended to take it from him. But Carolyn wasn't about to let that happen. Not now, not ever. The house, once a symbol of Ethan's dreams, now stood at the center of a bitter battle. It was more than just bricks and mortar. It was everything Ethan had fought for. The late nights of hard work, the sweat on his brow as he built something that would give his family stability, a place to call their own. It was the culmination of all of his effort, and now Sophia wanted to rip it away from him, to reduce it to just another thing to be bargained for. For Carolyn, this house wasn't just a structure. It was the embodiment of her son's resilience, his ability to keep going even when life had knocked him down. She could feel the pull to protect it, to stand firm against the injustice of Sophia's demands. But it was more than that. The house also represented everything Carolyn had worked for, everything she had sacrificed for Ethan's future. And she would be damned if she let it slip away so easily. "Get out, Sophia," Carolyn said, her voice suddenly cold. "You've taken enough from Ethan. Don't take this from him too." Sophia paused, her eyes flashing with anger, but she said nothing. She turned and walked out, leaving the papers behind, a final act of defiance. Carolyn stood there, her chest heaving with the weight of what had just transpired. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The courtroom was thick with tension, the kind of silence that weighed down on everyone present, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The judge, a no-nonsense man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, looked down at the proceedings with quiet authority. The gallery was nearly empty, save for a few scattered onlookers who had come to watch the drama unfold. But in this room, it felt like the world had narrowed to just two opposing forces: Carolyn Turner and Sophia Harris. Carolyn sat at the plaintiff's table, poised and collected, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She could feel the weight of the moment, the full gravity of what was at stake, not just the house, but Ethan's future. This was the defining battle, the one she had fought for in silence for so long. But now, with her legal expertise in full view, Carolyn was ready to turn the tide. She had been away from the courtroom for years. But the confidence and precision she once had in legal matters never left her. She might have traded her courtroom attire for the simplicity of motherhood, but the sharp, calculating mind of a lawyer was still very much alive. Now, she was back where she belonged, fighting for her son's rights. And she would not lose. Ethan, seated beside her, looked up at her with a quiet, hopeful gaze. His face was worn, but his eyes held a glimmer of something: trust. He trusted her, and that was all that mattered. Sophia had taken so much from him, but Carolyn would not let her take his dignity or his future. The moment the judge called the court to order, Carolyn stood, her posture unwavering. The room seemed to fall silent as she addressed the judge, her voice calm but powerful. "Your Honor, we are here today not just to settle a dispute over property, but to right a wrong," Carolyn began, her eyes scanning the room, making eye contact with the judge and then briefly with Sophia. "My client, Mr. Ethan Turner, has been wronged by his wife, who has not only betrayed him, but now seeks to take what is rightfully his. The house at the center of this trial is not just an asset. It is the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance." Carolyn's words were sharp, like a scalpel cutting through the layers of deceit. She laid out the facts with precision, her arguments airtight. Each point was carefully constructed, each piece of evidence strategically introduced. Her years as a lawyer had taught her how to anticipate every move, how to plan several steps ahead, and she executed her strategy flawlessly. Sophia, on the other hand, sat across the room, her face increasingly flushed with frustration. Her lawyer, whom she had hired with the same cold determination she used to demand half of Ethan's house, tried to maintain an air of professionalism. But even he couldn't ignore the panic growing in Sophia's eyes. Carolyn's calm, methodical presentation was slowly chipping away at the defense Sophia had built with lies and manipulation. With every piece of evidence Carolyn introduced, photos, emails, and statements, Sophia's defenses seemed to crumble further. Carolyn had anticipated this. She knew that the evidence of Sophia's affair would be crucial, and she knew that she needed to drive home the point that Sophia's actions had violated the very foundation of their marriage. As the photos of Sophia and William Jackson flashed on the screen in the courtroom, Carolyn saw Sophia's face twist with anger, her lips trembling, but she remained silent, her panic mounting. "Your Honor," Carolyn said as she presented the final piece of evidence, the recording of Sophia's conversation with William Jackson, discussing the affair in detail. This evidence speaks for itself. It shows that Sophia Harris has not only betrayed her husband emotionally, but has also acted in bad faith. She has placed her own selfish desires above the well-being of her family. Sophia's lawyer stood, attempting to object, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him with a single gesture. The courtroom was still, the weight of the moment palpable. Carolyn knew that this was it, the turning point. She could feel it in the air. This was the moment when Sophia's case would unravel completely. Sophia, who had entered the courtroom with all the confidence of a woman who believed she was in control, was now a picture of desperation. Her hands, which had once rested calmly on the table, were now fidgeting, her fingers tapping nervously. She glanced at her lawyer, as if hoping for some kind of rescue. But all he could offer was a brief shrug. His case was quickly falling apart. Sophia's face was flushed, her breath shallow as she tried to keep her composure. But it was obvious to everyone in the room that her confidence was fading. Her eyes darted around the courtroom, a mix of disbelief and anger flickering in them. She had believed that Carolyn, no matter how skilled, was just another opponent. But now, in the face of Carolyn's overwhelming strategy, Sophia was losing control. For the first time, Sophia's carefully constructed facade of calm and control cracked. She clenched her jaw, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Every argument she had been so sure of now seemed hollow in the face of Carolyn's legal precision. Carolyn wasn't just presenting facts. She was dismantling Sophia's life, piece by piece. Sophia's desperation was now on full display. She started to speak, her voice trembling with frustration. "This is not fair. You can't just take everything from me," she snapped, her voice echoing through the room. "I deserve my share of this house. I was married to him for years." But Carolyn didn't flinch. She stood tall, her presence unwavering. "This isn't about fairness, Sophia. This is about justice." Carolyn's strategy was simple but powerful. Expose the truth, stay calm, and let the evidence do the talking. She had spent hours preparing, anticipating every objection, every challenge. She had expected Sophia to be combative, and she was. But Carolyn had been ready for it. When Sophia's lawyer tried to argue that the affair didn't matter in the division of assets, Carolyn was quick to counter. "Your Honor, this isn't just about assets. This is about a betrayal of trust, of a marriage that has already been destroyed by actions that are irreconcilable. The property isn't just an asset. It's a symbol of the broken promises and the deceit that has been carried out in this household." The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur. Carolyn's arguments were so compelling, so clear, that even the judge seemed to sit straighter, his eyes fixed on her as she continued to speak. Each piece of evidence, each moment of suspense, was carefully orchestrated. Carolyn's quiet strength, her legal mind at work, was the perfect contrast to Sophia's increasing panic. And with each passing minute, it became clear to everyone in the room, Carolyn was going to win this fight. The tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable as Carolyn prepared to play the recording. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, every ear straining to catch what she was about to reveal. She had known this moment would be crucial, the moment that would strip away the last of Sophia's defenses. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, the quiet before the storm. With a steady hand, Carolyn placed the small audio recorder into the speaker system, her heart racing, but her face betraying none of the anxiety she felt. She glanced at Sarah, who was seated just behind her, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. This was Sarah's moment. This was her chance to show the world the truth. The courtroom fell completely silent as the first words played. "Sarah, listen to me," Sophia's voice echoed through the room, sharp and cold, as though every syllable were calculated. "If you tell anyone what you heard, I swear you'll regret it. You don't want to be the one to tear this family apart. Do you understand?" The room seemed to hold its breath as Sophia's manipulative tone filled the space, the words hanging heavy with malice. Carolyn's heart pounded as the courtroom absorbed the full weight of what was happening. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of control. Sophia wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was a manipulative force, using everyone around her to cover up her own betrayal. There was a sharp intake of breath from the audience, a murmur that spread like wildfire. Shock, disbelief, and outrage rippled through the room as Sophia's true nature was laid bare for all to hear. For a moment, it felt like the walls of the courtroom themselves were shaking. Carolyn knew this was the turning point. The truth was out. Sophia's face turned white as the recording continued, her eyes wide with panic. She shifted in her seat, her hand instinctively clutching the armrest, as though trying to hold on to something solid as her entire world unraveled. When the recording finished, the room fell into stunned silence. But Carolyn wasn't done. She turned to Sarah, who had been sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap, trying to steady herself. Carolyn motioned for her to stand, her voice calm but encouraging. Sarah, the young woman who had been caught in the web of Sophia's lies, stood with a slight tremor in her body, her face flushed with the weight of what she was about to do. She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Carolyn's, and then she began to speak. I didn't want to be here." Sarah's voice trembled at first, raw with emotion. "I didn't want to expose what happened. I didn't want to believe it either, but I can't keep lying. I can't let you all think that Sophia is a victim when she's the one who's been hurting us all." Her voice grew stronger with each word, though the tremor never fully left. Carolyn watched with pride, her heart swelling with admiration for Sarah's bravery. This was no small thing what Sarah was doing. She was giving up her own silence, sacrificing her comfort and safety to tell the truth. It wasn't easy. It was never easy. But Sarah was finally breaking free from Sophia's manipulation. "I overheard them," Sarah continued, her voice clear now. "I heard them talking and I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe I was mistaken, but I wasn't. I heard everything. Sophia and William talking about how they'd been seeing each other for months, about how she was going to get Ethan out of the picture. And she kept threatening me, telling me to keep quiet. She said it wasn't my place, that if I said anything, everything would fall apart. That she couldn't afford to let anyone find out." There was a collective gasp in the courtroom as Sarah finished, her shoulders shaking with the weight of what she had just shared. Carolyn's heart ached for her. This was more than just a courtroom victory. It was a moment of liberation, of breaking free from the chains that had kept her silent for so long. As Sarah spoke, Carolyn felt a rush of emotions flood through her: pride, relief, and something deeper, more protective. She had watched this young woman suffer, watched her be manipulated and silenced, and now she was speaking the truth loud and clear. Carolyn had always believed that the truth had power, and now it was powerful enough to bring the walls of Sophia's deceit crumbling down. Across the room, Ethan sat frozen, his eyes wide as he listened to Sarah's testimony. It was as if a weight had been lifted off his chest, as though he could finally breathe again. His hand clenched into a fist as he absorbed the reality of what had been happening behind his back. But there was something else in his eyes now, something like clarity. He could see it all now, the manipulation, the lies, the betrayal, but he wasn't angry, not in the way Carolyn expected. Instead, there was something more profound, relief. Finally, he could see the truth. Finally, he didn't have to live in the dark anymore. Sophia, on the other hand, looked like she had just been struck by a bolt of lightning. Her entire body trembled as her face contorted into a mixture of shock and fury. She had always controlled the narrative, had always been the one pulling the strings. But now, that control was slipping away, piece by piece. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for an escape, but there was no escape now. The truth had been spoken, and there was no taking it back. The judge looked over at Carolyn, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Turner, I believe we have all the evidence we need to make a decision." The room was quiet, the atmosphere heavy with the finality of what had just been revealed. Carolyn, though, felt something shift inside her, a sense of quiet victory. She had fought for this moment, fought for Ethan's future, and now the truth was out. There was no more hiding, no more lies. The moment of reckoning had come. And Carolyn knew that, no matter what happened next, they had already won. The tension in the courtroom had reached a boiling point. The air felt thick, and every movement seemed to echo, as if the walls themselves were bracing for the final blow. Carolyn Turner stood tall, calm and collected, her mind sharp with focus. She had presented her case with precision, and the truth had been made clear for all to see. But Sophia Harris, backed into a corner, wasn't going to go down without a fight. Sophia's face had grown increasingly red with frustration as the proceedings continued. Her calm veneer was now shattered, replaced by something darker, desperation. She had already seen her case unravel before her eyes, but she wasn't willing to let it go quietly. If she couldn't win through facts, she would try to destroy Carolyn's reputation. It was her last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her lies. Sophia stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor as she strode toward the center of the room. She looked at the judge, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and defiance. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaking with frustration. "We've heard all this talk about justice and integrity from Mrs. Turner, but let's not forget that she's no saint herself." Carolyn's eyes flickered slightly, but she remained calm, her posture unchanging as she met Sophia's gaze. She knew what was coming. Sophia was trying to shift the focus, to make this about anything other than her own actions. But Carolyn was ready. "Mrs. Turner," Sophia continued, her voice growing more venomous, "was once a lawyer, yes. But not all lawyers are as virtuous as she'd like to pretend. She suffered a massive defeat in court just a few years ago. A case so embarrassing, so humiliating, that it drove her to quit her profession entirely. Do you really trust someone with such a disastrous past to be the arbiter of truth in this case?" The courtroom gasped in disbelief. Some of the onlookers whispered amongst themselves, glancing from Carolyn to Sophia. It was a bold move, but it was also a reckless one. Sophia's attempt to discredit Carolyn was calculated, a final attempt to make the jury, the judge, and the audience question Carolyn's credibility. But Carolyn didn't flinch. She had known that this moment would come, the moment when Sophia would resort to personal attacks in a desperate bid for control. And Carolyn was prepared. Her calmness was a stark contrast to Sophia's frantic energy. Carolyn took a steady breath, her gaze unwavering as she looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," she began, her voice smooth but firm, "yes, I once faced a legal defeat, a case that did not go in my favor. And yes, I made the decision to step away from the law, to put my family first and find another path. But let me make one thing clear. A single defeat does not define a person, nor does it strip away their integrity." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The room had gone completely still, all eyes on her as she stood poised and resolute. "I may have walked away from my legal career, but not because I lacked courage or ability. I left because I chose to prioritize something greater, my son's well-being, his future. My decision to retire from law was not an admission of failure. It was a decision made out of love and sacrifice, and I stand by it." Her voice softened just a fraction as she turned toward Ethan, who was sitting beside her. There was a fleeting moment of tenderness between them, a shared understanding before she continued. "Let me remind you, Sophia," Carolyn said, her tone now firm, "that in this courtroom, we are not discussing personal history or past mistakes. We are discussing what is right and just. We are discussing a betrayal that you orchestrated, and no amount of slander against me can change that. Sophia's face twisted in anger, her hands clenched into fists, but Carolyn didn't waver. She stood strong, unshaken by the venom that Sophia threw at her. The shift in the room was palpable. The audience, who had previously been divided, now seemed to collectively lean toward Carolyn's side. The quiet murmurs of disbelief that had followed Sophia's attack began to fade, replaced by an air of quiet respect. The judge, his face impassive but his eyes sharp, took note of the calm resolve Carolyn exuded. He looked from Carolyn to Sophia, who was visibly seething with frustration, her entire body rigid with barely contained rage. Sophia's attack on Carolyn's reputation had failed, not only because the facts were on Carolyn's side, but because Carolyn had responded with integrity, with grace, and with the kind of quiet strength that spoke volumes. Her composure in the face of such a personal attack only solidified her position as someone who stood for what was right. Sophia, on the other hand, had lost control. Her final attempt to salvage her case by attacking Carolyn had backfired, leaving her exposed for what she truly was, a woman willing to destroy others to get what she wanted. The judge adjusted his glasses, glancing down at the papers in front of him before he spoke, his voice clear and authoritative. "It is evident, Mrs. Harris," he said, his words cutting through the tension, "that you have attempted to shift the focus away from the facts and toward personal attacks. This will not be tolerated." Carolyn gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. She had faced the worst of it, Sophia's desperate lies, and emerged unscathed. But it wasn't just her calm demeanor or sharp legal mind that had won the room's respect. It was the quiet dignity with which she held her ground, the strength of character she had displayed in the face of adversity. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills the air with electricity, as if the whole world is waiting for the final word. The judge, his gavel resting on the table, looked at the paperwork before him, his face calm but serious. Carolyn, Ethan, and Sarah were seated at the plaintiff's table, their hearts racing. The months of pain, the endless battles, the tears, and the sleepless nights had all led to this moment. Ethan sat beside his mother, his hands resting on the table, his fingers fidgeting in nervous anticipation. He had come so far, had fought so hard to hold on to the life he had worked for, and now it was all about to come to an end. The house, Sarah, his future, it was all in the balance. Sophia sat across the room, her face a mask of tense determination. But even she could no longer deny what had happened. Her once firm grip on the case had slipped, unraveling with each revelation, each piece of truth that Carolyn had brought to light. There was no escape now. The judge finally cleared his throat, breaking the stillness. "I have carefully considered all the evidence presented, as well as the testimony given. After thorough deliberation, it is my judgment." He paused as if savoring the moment, as if the weight of the decision hung in the air. Carolyn's breath caught in her throat, and she felt Ethan's hand, warm and steady, brush against hers. Sarah, too, sat at attention, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. "I hereby award full ownership of the house to Mr. Ethan Turner," the judge continued, "and I also grant custody of Sarah Turner to her mother, Carolyn Turner." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, though Carolyn could barely believe it. The moment she had fought for, the moment she had prayed for, had arrived. Ethan's eyes welled with tears, his hands trembling slightly as he turned to Carolyn. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. The weight of everything they had gone through, the betrayal, the heartache, the uncertainty, began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of triumph. Sophia's face, once so sure, had crumbled. She sat there, stiff and silent, the shock of the verdict settling over her like a dark cloud. It was over. She had lost. In the weeks that followed the trial, Carolyn, Ethan, and Sarah began to rebuild their lives. It was slow at first. There was so much to heal from, so much to make sense of. But with each passing day, they found strength in each other, drawing from the deep well of love and resilience that had always been at their core. Carolyn and Ethan worked together to fix the house, to make it theirs again. They painted the walls, redid the floors, and filled the rooms with the warmth and laughter that had once been missing. Sarah, too, became a part of the healing process, her presence a reminder of the strength that had brought them all through the storm. They spent quiet evenings together, cooking meals, telling stories, and rebuilding the sense of family they had nearly lost. For Ethan, there was a sense of peace that settled over him. The betrayal, the heartbreak, it was still there, but it no longer held him captive. The house was no longer just a symbol of the life he had lost. It was a symbol of his future, of his resilience, of the strength his mother had shown in fighting for him. With Carolyn and Sarah by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. They were stronger now, and nothing could break them. Sophia, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of her actions. The betrayal she had orchestrated, the manipulation she had used to tear apart a family. These were the things that would haunt her now. Her life unraveled quickly after the trial. She lost not only the house, but also the trust of everyone around her. Her affair with William Jackson had come to light, and the truth of her selfishness had spread throughout the community like wildfire. Friends, family, and even her colleagues distanced themselves from her, unable to look past the cruelty she had shown. Sophia eventually moved away, unable to stay in a town that had once been her home. Her relationship with William Jackson fell apart as well, the weight of her actions proving too much for him to bear. She found herself isolated, left to reflect on the choices she had made and the family she had destroyed. The bitterness of her defeat lingered, but it was a bitter truth she could never escape. As Carolyn sat by the window one evening, watching the sun set over the horizon, she reflected on the journey they had taken to get here. The road had been long and painful, full of moments of doubt and despair. But it had also been full of love, of resilience, and of a commitment to doing what was right. She thought about the fight she had waged for Ethan, for their family, and the strength that had emerged from their darkest moments. The truth, Carolyn knew, had a way of coming to light, no matter how hard someone tried to bury it, and in the end, it was the truth that had won. She looked over at Ethan and Sarah, who were sitting together on the couch, talking and laughing. The house, now a home once more, was filled with the sound of their voices. For the first time in a long time, it felt like everything was right again. There was peace here, a peace that came from knowing that no matter what life threw their way, they had each other. "Everything's going to be okay," Carolyn whispered to herself, a quiet smile spreading across her face. In the end, truth, love, and family were what mattered most, and they had all three. Justice had been served, and the future looked brighter than ever.